Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes. I'm in the studio with Ryan Foster of Cycling Without Age in Brisbane. I'm here on Gubbi Gubbi country in Queensland, in Caboolture. I know Ryan because our beautiful, amazing, most dedicated volunteer, Kirk, found out about Cycling Without Age, Sunshine Coast. I think I reached out to you, Ryan, to say, do you want to come on the show and talk about it? Perhaps you could say where you're calling from and also what made you interested in this whole project.
Thanks, Wendy. I'm calling from Bianjin, Brisbane, and I first got involved in Cycling Without Age Australia back in 2019. What's happened to me at the time was every year around December, I would think about New Year's resolutions and I'd think about what I want to do with my time and where I wanted to volunteer for the next year. And in December 2019 I came across the Cycling Without Age website and I had a look, and there was a contact for Brisbane, so I reached out to them. I didn't hear anything, and then I got in contact with Sunshine Coast and they said, oh, we don't know what happened to them. And I said, what's the deal? And they said, there's nothing in Brisbane, you should start it. And I said, what's involved? We had a chat, and an hour later I said to Tim on the Sunshine Coast, I reckon I could do that. And yes, we've been going ever since. COVID in 2020 slowed us down, and Brisbane 2022 we had some floods, so it hasn't been a smooth ride, but it's certainly been an enjoyable one.
In that conversation, what is it that you required to know, or what happened in that conversation?
There's two things Cycling Without Age you need to be mildly passionate about. One is cycling, but more importantly is people that don't get to experience the joy of cycling. You really want to be committed to making sure that everyone can have a go across the country. When I was talking to the Sunshine Coast team about what's involved, two things really stood out. Cycling Without Age is an international movement, started in Denmark. It's in 46 countries now. So there's a lot of sharing online. There's an online portal that you can sign up to, and you just ask each other questions like, how do you fundraise? How do you get grants? Who's got insurance? What types of bikes do you buy? What do you do in the wet weather? What do you do in the hot weather? All of that kind of stuff. So you can have a bit of a dig around there, and you need to be one of those people that can network and find the people that can do the sort of stuff, which is get the money to buy the bikes, understand, get trained and get insured. The beautiful thing about the program is that there's a national Cycling Without Age, and if you want to come under their governance, that's what you can do. That's what I did. So we've got national insurance. I just pay my fee for the Brisbane lot, and the rest is just spent raising funds to get the bikes themselves, the insurance, and keep the bikes on the road with maintenance. And we're just all volunteers and we love it.
That's really good. So I'm curious to know what's the vehicle called?
A trishaw. There's a whole bunch of bikes. They're not cheap. It's a good question because it's important. Sometimes people contact, oh, I want to get one of those bikes. Where do you buy them from? And I tell them about where you can get them from, and they say, oh, great, how much is it? And when I say $20,000, most people kind of go, oh my goodness, that's way too much money. The good news is that more and more people are importing different varieties of trishaws, and the trishaw is tri, meaning three-wheeled. When I was a kid, I used to go on holidays and you'd hire those bikes at resorts, and mum or dad would ride up the front and the kids would sit in the back. These are the reverse. The passengers sit up the front. They deserve the best view, and the cyclist sits behind and steers, and there's enough space in the front for two people. We've also got a wheelchair accessible bike. They're all e-bikes. They're easy to pedal, and the wheelchair accessible bike just means someone who can't comfortably transfer from their wheelchair into our two-seater, we can roll the wheelchair up onto a platform at the front of the bike, strap them in and safely go for a ride as well. The wheelchair one's about $20,000. They're pretty expensive. There are cheaper models more and more in the country coming in. The cheaper ones are excellent, but these ones that we import from Denmark are just absolutely beautiful. They have a hood over the top to keep the sun and the rain off as well. In terms of quality, they're fantastic, and obviously we want to keep them for as long as possible with as little maintenance as possible.
And when you said the wheelchair accessible, that's for passengers. That's
Yes.
not for the person riding the bike.
No, for the passenger. What we do often is we'd go to an aged care service, and a number of those who were maybe on wheelie walkers or walking sticks or quite comfortable walking, they'd climb into the trishaw and they'd sit side by side in the front, sometimes with each other, sometimes they'd go just with one of our volunteers, and sometimes they'd go with one of the aged care workers. We saw that people were missing out, so those that were more reliant on a wheelchair and a little more challenged in transferring into the front of a bike, they were missing out. So we wanted to make sure that we could get something where as many people from aged care services can participate together, all on the one ride. There's another one that we're looking at too. The passenger sits next to the rider and they can pedal. We find that there's quite a number of people in aged care and disability support services who are quite capable of physical exercise, but maybe they've experienced a cognitive disability or maybe they have dementia, so they're not really comfortable steering, but they don't want to be a passive passenger because they can still pedal. So that's what we're looking at next, is side by side volunteer steers. You can both pedal if you like, or you can stop pedaling if you're the passenger, but a little bit more active so that they're more actively participating and keeping fit.
So if you get to the end of this episode and you go, gee, I live in an area where there's tons of seniors, so we're quite close to Bribie Island, maybe somebody in the community there would like to start one, and they go, 20 grand, yeah, I can see I don't have that in my bank account. In terms of how to get a grant, how would you suggest that somebody goes about getting a grant?
There's probably half a dozen models that different chapters have used around Australia. For myself, I was a bit familiar with the grants landscape, so I was comfortable Googling grants and just going through, and then I signed up to a portal called Funding Finder across Australia that's free to sign up, and it gives you weekly alerts depending on the criteria that you set. I reckon I get emailed 10 grants a week, and probably 2 of those are suitable to apply. They're not always for the money that we need. They might be too low, so there might only be a portion of the funding that's required, but there is plenty of grants out there. I mean, it is competitive as well. Once you find the grant, I suppose you need to either be comfortable writing a grant application or find someone that does. But we find that there's quite a few services, particularly disability services, that might support you in writing a grant. They just don't want to manage the program. They don't want to manage the volunteers. They don't want to look after the bikes, but they might be okay with applying for money on your behalf. And then there's obviously other types of fundraising. If you're not comfortable seeking out grants, then maybe you've got a really keen, supportive local network that might want to hold a fundraising event to fundraise to get your first bike. There's philanthropy and sponsorship. Sometimes we find that someone might be quite connected to the local business community, and there's an opportunity for a business to sponsor the first bike, or a couple of businesses. I was interested in getting 3 or 4 sponsors for $5,000 each, and then you can determine if you want them to be paying annually, or if it's just about getting your first bike, then that's pretty good branding, because a bike will last 7 to 10 years. So a sponsor could be part of getting that off the ground, particularly with local communities, because they obviously get some nice branding and there's some media opportunities in getting that first bike in a community, and then they get to meet the passengers, and there's even more media opportunities there because you can start to tell those stories of inclusion and how wonderful a local business is for supporting people to get out and stay active in their communities. Different chapters have different approaches. At the moment, I'm most comfortable with applying for grants. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I just like to sit at home applying online without talking to too many people. Other people, big shout out to Wayne on the Gold Coast who runs Cycling Without Age down there. He's a people person. Wayne basically goes around and starts to get lots of sponsors on board because he's just so passionate, loves talking about it, loves meeting people and getting them as excited as he is in the outcomes that the program can deliver.
I'm much more extroverted, and the idea of writing grants and having to sit there and go, is this going to be worth it? Because grants are very hit and miss. I prefer a more sure bet.
If you're starting a local group, ideally you want one of you and one of me. You want to cover off all the bases and you want to play to each other's strengths to get a bit of a team together. The more people involved, the better. I get motivated by other people's enthusiasm. Before we even had our first bikes, I did a call out in our local community and through some of the cycling groups around Brisbane. About 6 of us went and met one day, just got out some paper, wrote down what we thought we wanted to achieve, and we put together some fundraising ideas. We didn't have our first bike at the time. We just all wanted to get a bike, and we started to look at that, and thankfully we were able to apply for a Queensland government grant and got enough for 2 bikes, which is lovely to launch with 2 bikes at once. So they're definitely out there.
How many bike riders do you have in your team? What do you think is a wise number?
It's quite a scalable model. Malcolm got in touch and he said, Ryan, I live out in the western suburbs of Brisbane. I don't mind coming into you and being a volunteer, but I think I want to start one out here. I know quite a few people that would be interested. Malcolm started up a chapter, and I think originally he had 3 volunteers. And so 3 plus him. With a bike, you want at least 2 volunteers even for one bike, because you want someone someone comfortable kind of helping passengers get on, and we love to have someone that we call a scout out the front, scouting for any hazards, if there's any potholes, or maybe there's a couple of kids up that are playing near the path and they've got a soccer ball, so you keep an eye out on objects coming in and people. We always try and take the number of people that are required to ride the bike, so one bike, one rider, plus a scout to help load the passengers and follow and make sure that the path is safe. You could start with as little as 2, really. We've done plenty of rides with just 2 of us, and with 2 bikes or 3 bikes, 3 or 4 volunteers. Some volunteers want to ride once a month, some want to do twice a week, so it really depends on how active people want to participate. And again, each chapter is different. The way that we run in Brisbane Central is we keep it pretty flexible. The aged care services get in contact with us. They say, I want to do Monday morning. Great, we book it in, and then volunteers sign up through a free app of which shifts they want to take. Sometimes we find volunteers will be away on holidays for a month, so they won't participate. Sometimes they move interstate and then they come back. It's very flexible. In the 3 years that we've been going, we've trained about 50 volunteers. We've probably got about 20-25 that are active, but there's about a core dozen that probably are involved at any one time. You can just grow it. You can start off with 2 volunteers, and I think Wayne on the Gold Coast probably has about 50 active volunteers. He's got about 8 or 9 trishaws at the moment, so absolutely massive fleet with a huge committed group of volunteers. It's quite the sight to see 8 trishaws coming down a path carrying 2 passengers each. You see 16 passengers and sometimes 2 wheelchair bikes. It's a beautiful visual of inclusion and plenty of smiles as well.
Whereabouts do you ride in Brisbane? Do you stay near the aged home, or do you have particular areas?
I think that's something that's common for cycling without age. We scope out the routes that'll both be enjoyable and safe, and by that I mean what we don't do is go for a ride down the local main street, because unfortunately there's lots of cars and it's not always safe. In Brisbane, it's a pretty dense city in the inner city, so we stick to the paths along the rivers, through local parks, into the botanical gardens, around the South Bank area, anywhere that's kind of not on the street. We've got a mix of aged care services in the local area that we ride to, and we pick people up from there. And then we've got a high number of aged care services that come to us. So we don't transport the bikes at the moment. Some of the chapters do. They have a trailer and they go to wherever they can get to. If you don't live in a densely populated space and it's a bit of a hassle to ride to everywhere, you can certainly get a trailer and put the bikes on there and go down to somewhere that would be enjoyable and meet people there. What we try and do is make sure that we visit places that maybe people haven't visited for a while, like the botanical gardens, or maybe we go along the riverfront where some people have some historic stories, share some memories. But yeah, we love to hear the tales of the passengers that say quite often, I've lived in Brisbane for 80 years and I've never been here. And then we have a bit of a chat. So a little bit of local knowledge, but quite often we as volunteers, we're the ones that are learning from our older passengers.
And what have you learned about Brisbane and the areas that you've visited? I presume they're all basically seniors community, is that right?
Mostly. Aged care services are pretty structured in terms of looking for activities for their residents to do. Most of them are aged care services. We've got some disability service providers and some individual carers. As more people work out what's good for them, if for example they get NDIS funding, they're using that funding and their carers. We don't charge for the service, but they obviously need transport to get to us. And a carer, we're finding a lot of people are coming and having a ride with us, perhaps with their carer. Every Thursday we ride with a woman called Charmaine. About once a month her mum comes along and joins in. It's a nice way to connect families as well. Yes, mostly aged care services.
I'm just picturing this. You get a call and it says, hi, it's ABC Aged Care Services. We have Mary who would like to go for a bike ride with Cycling Without Age. What do we do? How does it happen? What is that whole process?
When you start a chapter, I suppose, nobody knows you exist in the world, so you get in contact with aged care services and introduce the service and tell them how it works, basically. If you're starting out from scratch, you might not know how it works, so you kind of learn together, I suppose. You learn about what routes in the local community are great, which ones bring the smiles and which one bring the bumps that people don't love as much. Word of mouth is spreading. The Cycling Without Age organisation mostly now get people that are contacting us saying, I heard about you, or I worked at this service, or a colleague of mine found out about this, or a family friend, whatever it is, and they say, tell us about it. We just say, look, we're pretty flexible. We'll ride any time of day or night when suits you, and we'd love to do more rides. But aged care services, not a massive fan of nighttime activities, unfortunately, not yet anyway. So they'll ask us about it and we'll say, look, what days suit you, what hours suit you, and then we just talk about what to expect. If it's their first time, we just explain that, look, we go as fast as the passengers want, just to reassure them that we're not here to kind of hoon along the river. We're here to take take it nice and slow. We want to be at a speed where we can have a nice conversation. We explain to them, look, it's up to them how they want to participate. Some of them will just bring 4 people, and those 4 passengers will be people that want to go on a 40-minute ride. Each aged care service schedules about an hour with us. Some of them will say, look, it's the first time, I've got 12 people, let's do 3 times 15-minute trips around the park. And then the aged care service, I suppose, takes the feedback from their residents, and some of them will say, look, that was fantastic, we want to go longer next time, or can we go in a different direction, or I don't like going as long, I want it shorter. Whatever it is, we just adapt to what they like to do. Sometimes they're a bit sneaky in a good way. We had a group that was coming, and there was 8 of them, and 4 of them loved it so much that when they started telling people back where they live that it was a terrible service and nobody should participate, and they were doing that so that they could have the whole hour to themselves, which was lovely. But we wondered why they kept coming back, and they eventually said to us, we've told everybody that it's no good because we don't want anybody taking our seats. So they loved it. They've become a regular.
So you've clearly got a few regulars who like to come on a frequent basis, and they might come once a week, is that right?
There's weekly groups, monthly groups, fortnightly groups, whatever suits them. The majority of it is that they book it in. They like to rotate, particularly because this is a out of service activity. I'm sure when they're doing yoga or movie nights, you just lock it in because the residents are there anyway. There is an effort required to get aged care residents into the bus, down to the park, out of the bus and so forth. Some of them mix it up and they book maybe once every 2 months, but certainly some of the regulars have got a couple of groups that are weekly and fortnightly, and that just allows them to, particularly if you can get to an aged care service, no one has to make a decision until you turn up. Mary, for example, might love it one week and then the next week she's not feeling well, so she doesn't ride. If they've got that flexibility, it just means that as word gets around and depending on the day how residents feel, then they can participate or not participate. Sometimes they come to the park anyway and they don't ride. They say, I don't feel like riding today, I just came for the sunshine, which is great. We always try and meet residents in a location that's accessible for bus and maxi taxi, has accessible toilets and somewhere nice and shady to sit. We often find that they have morning tea, particularly if you just have one trishaw and there's a group of 4, well, you've got to do 2 trips. So the residents that are left behind need to be comfortable just sitting there and doing something. We'll go to a park that has a rose garden or maybe a cafe where they have a cup of coffee while they're waiting for their friends to get back and for them to have a go.
This sounds like it's got a very strong anti-social isolation vibe to it. It's about getting people who perhaps feel socially isolated. Maybe you're the only friend, for lack of a better word, familiar face, smiling, who comes and visits, because we know that a lot of elderly people, they don't get any contact anymore because their families have moved interstate or the relationships are estranged. There is a lot of social isolation and loneliness in seniors communities. It turns out actually the young adults are more lonely than the seniors. And it would be great to get some young adults volunteering their time with the seniors to get both of those perspectives. That would be a great way of mixing the two. What have you seen change perhaps in one person? Say how you've seen them change and come out of themselves.
There's 3 passengers that come to mind. They're not all in the same group. One of them is a guy called Bill, and he's in pretty close to high care needs aged care, and he used to be a semi-professional motorcyclist and he loves going fast. The change for him is the first time he came along, lovely guy, happy to have a bit of a joke, but it was a bit too slow for him. So then we matched him with one of our volunteers, Amir, who's an absolute speed demon, not with passengers, loves coming down a big hill trying to do 80 kilometres an hour, right, on his own 2-wheel bike. He and Bill take off, they're probably doing 25 kilometres an hour, but in a wheelchair accessible bike, that feels fast. They love it. It's that matching where we see the real value. Everybody loves to have a chat, everyone loves to go for a bike ride, that's why they come along, that's why we volunteer. But some people want something a little bit different. And there's another woman that we ride with and she complains every single time. She doesn't want to go. And we pick her up at the aged care service. She'll openly say, I don't want to go, why do I have to do this? They're making me do it again. And so then she'll get in the trishaw and we'll go for a ride, and we like to go for a bit of a longer ride with her, around 40 minutes. And after about 15-20 minutes she'll start to have a chat. About 10 minutes before we get back she'll say, do we have to go back? And we say, oh, I thought you didn't want to even come. And she goes, I don't want to go back, I just want to stay on the bike if that's okay. And we asked her one day why that is, because she's not an incredibly warm outward outwardly loving person. And she said, because nobody likes me back at the aged care service. They tell me that. They tell me that I'm a hassle, and it's just nice to be out. So the reason that she starts the ride in such a frustrated mood is because she's not having a good time at the aged care service. And then she gets on the bike and she doesn't expect to have a good time. Then she understands that, look, this is an opportunity just to feel the wind in your hair, have a bit of a chat, get out of the aged care service, get some sun in your face, and she doesn't want to go back at the end. The staff there tell us that her mood is much better when she returns than when she leaves, obviously. So that's really positive to see that happen. The next step, I think, will be that maybe someone joins her. She usually goes riding either with a staff member or by herself with us. They'll probably need some new residents in there that start to meet her and get to know her maybe on the bike. Maybe that'll break down some barriers. Then there's the stories of those that don't get a lot of visitors. When you find someone with a similar sense of humour, I think that can give you a great sense of belonging. Even though you've only got in common that you're riding a bike, they're a bit cheeky. They give it in good faith. They like having a go. If a volunteer's been away for 2 weeks, they'll come back. Someone from the aged care service. It's nice that you've joined us, that you've taken time out of your busy life to come back to us. So they give a bit of stick to the volunteers, but they love it. So they certainly form relationships with the volunteers. They know when they've gone away. They certainly ask each other what will be happening over the next 4 weeks is discussions of Christmas plans, which is always a bit of a risky topic. Like you said, some people won't have visitors over Christmas, but the aged care services do an amazing job at making sure that people feel included over the festive season. So if they don't have family, they'll start to talk about, well, we're going to have this at the centre and so forth. But to share those conversations over time, particularly for the regulars that start to build relationships with our volunteers, is something fantastic. We start with a bike ride and hopefully we end with new memories and a couple of new friendships.
It's November at the time of recording. In January, February of course is the hottest month. How do you go with the humidity and the heat? A, for the cyclist, the bike rider, and B, for the visitor.
If anyone knows Queensland summers, it is absolutely brutal. We try and start our rides earlier and start them later. It doesn't always fit in with aged care service schedules in terms of changeover of staff, meals and so forth. So it doesn't always happen like that. There's a couple of routes that we won't do in summer. There's just not enough protection from the sun. A lot of concrete space providing that radiant heat. So we just don't do them in summer. And then we try and choose the route that has the most amount of shade. A morning route will be different to an afternoon route in terms of which way we go and for how long we go. Unfortunately, aged care residents seem to love it and it doesn't seem to bother most of them. I say unfortunately because in the middle of summer, when we've got a group booked in for 11 a.m, for example, close to the peak of the heat of the day, we will ask them, it's a pretty warm day, it's 33, and are you sure you want to ride? And our volunteers will be secretly hoping that they cancel. We're a passionate, committed bunch, so we don't often cancel on the aged care service. We wait to see if they want to ride. 9 times out of 10 they say let's do it because they're hankering to get out. They want to get out into the breeze. It's always cooler down by the river. That's the beauty, I think, of the Sunshine Coast chapter, the Gold Coast chapter. They're always by the ocean. It's a couple of degrees cooler. When we're by the river, yeah, it's a couple of degrees cooler, so we do what we can. We make a call. If it gets up around 35, we just call it off. We just think that that's too risky for our volunteers and the residents. And certainly we encourage our volunteers to, if it doesn't work for them, it doesn't work for them. This week just gone actually, we had a lot of storms around Brisbane, a lot of humidity, and we did have a couple of volunteers say, hey, I can't ride tomorrow. It's just too brutal. That's fine because it's a free service and we provide it regularly. Postponing with groups is not so much of an issue. Safety and comfort's the most important thing. We don't want anybody getting too hot and we don't want anybody getting sunburnt.
I come from New South Wales, so 33 I'd be going, why is that hot? But what people don't realise when you come from the southern states, it's the humidity that kills you. So there's a ratio of temperature and humidity where once you get to 35 degrees and you get up to 100% relative humidity, that's the point where you actually can't sweat anymore because the air is so wet that you can't actually evaporate the sweat. So you end up being hotter and hotter. So 35 degrees is excruciating in the humidity. Whereas down south, you might be able to get to 38, 40, 41, but the humidity isn't so high. I mean, it's hot, obviously, but you can manage that a bit more easily. All right, we're heading up towards the end of time. If somebody is a community member, say they've got a relative who would like to join what you're doing, maybe be a volunteer, or they've got a relative who would like a ride, what do you suggest they do?
Yeah, just jump on the Cycling Without Age website, cycling without age, all one word, and you can find your local chapter. For us in Brisbane, we just encourage people to get in contact, and they ask, what's volunteering involved? So we let them know that, look, all you need to do is have a read of this. If you agree to this, which is basically an outline, we're here to provide a free service. We love working with people of all ages and abilities, and we like bike riding. If that's in your philosophy, then come along, do a couple of hours training with us, and that's really to make sure that you're comfortable riding a bike. At the end of that, we say, what would you like to do? A couple of people will say, it's not really for me actually, or life's changed, I've got to go and do something else. And then most people will say, great, I'm keen to volunteer, and then we line up a couple of shadowing sessions. They come and see what it's all about. And some people will say, I really want to help out, but I'm not comfortable riding the bike with passengers yet, and that's fine too. We've had volunteers that just meet us at the start location, and they'll bring some tea and coffee for the aged care residents and biscuits, and they'll actually just stay there and chat, which is lovely. The residents then meet somebody else and don't even need to go on a bike if they don't want to. And then for people who are interested in maybe booking a ride for a family member or themselves, just get in contact, and certainly we just arrange a time. The beautiful thing about that is there's usually more flexibility for people booking things for family members. So we've had people book for Father's Day, for example. There's a lovely woman who last Father's Day, it was her dad's first day using a wheelchair, so his mobility had decreased to the point that he'd needed to use a wheelchair. They were going to the park, and it was literally his first time in the wheelchair that day, and he got to the park and she'd arranged, we went and met her there. He was able to transfer into the trishaw, so she sat next to him. The beautiful thing, I'm going to stereotype here, but some men aren't great at having conversations eye to eye, but sit them next to someone where they're both facing forward, and it's beautiful. And yeah, we've seen that around Christmas time, people will book a ride for a loved one. For birthdays, we went for a ride actually with a grandparent who was celebrating, I think, her 95th birthday, and the teenage granddaughter, the mum said, go with Gran, and the teenage daughter got inside next to Gran, and she took a book with her, and she's reading the book while Gran's sitting there, and then Gran's asking, what's that building over there? Oh, that's All Hallows School. Oh yeah, I remember that school, I knew some people that went there. And finally the granddaughter put down the book and started engaging in the conversation. They didn't look at each other in the eyes, and that's fine, that was the beauty of it, and then they started to spend some time that I don't think they otherwise would have in terms of having a conversation together about schools, because we saw a school, we talked about school. Most people went to a school sometime in their life, so there's something to talk about there. But yet that was just a result of someone saying, hey, I just wondered if you guys provide private rides. We said we sure do, and then they often ask, what's the cost? It's part of our philosophy. We don't charge people. If they want to make a donation at the end, that's fantastic, but not necessary. And we just arrange a time and place to meet, and off we go.
Say somebody is at council and they're going, oh, I don't know, this cycling without age thing, should we do it here? What are our permissions? Da 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 da. What should somebody at council who's in that area of responsibility, I don't know what that would be.
The different areas of council that I think are worth connecting with, or at least advising them of the service. There's obviously the councillors, and councillors, like any elected official, love to know what's happening in their community, love to promote it, love to get involved. Maybe they love to fund it too, if you're lucky. We might call the active transport team, so they're interested in actually getting people on bikes. And then there's the infrastructure type team that do the pathways and so forth. The active guys, they like to know about it because they want to see as many people riding as possible. So they're usually up for promoting it and making sure that they're aware of a wide network. They go along to promote cycling across the city, and they want to make sure that if someone comes up who may be experiencing disability, or maybe an older resident with limited mobility, that they can say, hey, it's not just about two-wheel bikes, it's not just about pedaling for the rest of your life, there's other ways to participate, get outdoors and stay connected to people. They love to promote it. Once you tell them it's a free service run by volunteers, it's happy days, so everyone will tell everybody about that. And then the transport planners are actually really important, because these bikes are close to 1 metre wide, and so you need wide enough footpaths, not just for the bike but for other bikes to pass you. And more bollards, those cylinder concrete or plastic sticks that go in the ground to stop cars driving into areas, are popping up across the city, which is fine, except not everybody regulates the width between bollards in the same way. We're finding in Brisbane we have a lot of privately owned public spaces, and what that means is that there might be a bikeway going through through a new development, which may be absolutely brilliant and beautiful, but that is private land and they set the bollards slightly at a different width than council. These are all very boring things to talk about, but they're literally the deal between getting through an area and not getting through an area. We had a large cycling event in Brisbane to bring people together. We were riding to a bicycle film festival. We met in the main square of town in Brisbane, that's King George Square. And King George Square as a main square has a number of security measures around it, including these bollards. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the trishaws through the bollards, so I couldn't meet everybody in the middle of King George Square. I had to go around the side street and join up with them and ride to the film festival. Little things like that you wouldn't otherwise think of, because it's not an issue with a two-wheel bike. But once you get a bike that's about nearly a metre wide, there's obstacles that are the difference between people being able to participate or not.
We're just going to wrap up because we're at time. It's been a great conversation. I had no idea about this, so I'm really pleased that you came on. Any closing remarks, any thoughts that you would like to share?
Thanks for having us on. The beauty of cycling at that age was one of the first things I said, which is there's a whole network. So while there's over 40 chapters across Australia, anyone that wants to start their own because there's not one close, it's not a hard thing to do. Aside from meeting some wonderful residents that haven't experienced cycling for a while, the best part is the way that people share information and stay connected. When we were starting up in Brisbane, certainly I probably spent many hours on the phone to the guys at the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast asking them questions. Actually, I emailed them last week and said, where did you get your new shirts from? They look amazing. They email you everything that you need to know and you can just make it happen. So if anyone wants to start their own, start it. If anyone wants to volunteer, reach out. You can volunteer in any way that you like for any amount that you like. And if you want to become a passenger, please reach out. We certainly love to ride with you.
Thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciated you taking the time. It's a wet Saturday afternoon. It's been a great conversation. What you're providing is a really tangible, easy way to begin to think, how can I help in the community?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks so
Wendy.
much, Ryan.
Thanks very
Thanks
much.
a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.